think it's gone live. I hope it has. I'm told it takes 30 seconds. Just do a few Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya and see if it cuts in. It says live at 29 seconds. So I think we're going to start now. Okay. Welcome everyone to our continuing introduction to Bhagavad Gita. I hope everyone's well. We'll begin by chanting Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swamini Namane Namaste Saraswati Devim Gauravani Pracharane Nirvisesha Sunyavadi Paschachadeshitarane. Offer my respectful obeisances unto His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, who is very dear to Lord Krishna, having taken shelter of His lotus feet. O servant of Saraswati Goswami, you are kindly preaching the words of Lord Chaitanya Dev and delivering the Western countries which are filled with impersonalism and voidism. So we're going to pick up from the introduction to Bhagavad Gita, and I've noticed that one or two of the devotees, basically they are able to just speak from one or two lines and then pick it up again the next time. So it's very interesting. I tend to do a little, cover a little more, but where I'm going to try and pick it up is, we'll begin. Yes, I think Krishnendu was the last one that I saw had posted where he'd done up to. Okay, let's pick it up from here. So this is beginning from, let me see, for those that are looking at Bhagavad Gita, major paragraphs before this are, one begins with the supreme conscious Ishvara is similar to the living entity, and that's one of the headings there. And then the next main large paragraph is heading is when we are contaminated, called conditioned. So it's hard to say because I'm on a very small Bhagavad Gita here, but it's about page 10, 11 here on this little small Bhagavad Gita. See if you can pick it up. When we are materially contaminated, we are called conditioned. False consciousness is exhibited under the impression that I am a product of material nature. This is a major statement. This is called false ego. So this is false identity. It's not just about being all proud and puffed up, which tends to happen as we identify with all of this. But it's, and when we are materially contaminated, so the Prabhupada, the nature of the jiva is pure, just like the rain. The rain is pure, but when it comes in contact with the ground, it becomes muddy. In a similar way, the pure soul is without contamination and is in full Krishna consciousness. But when we come in contact with the material nature, we lose that clarity. We become muddied. False consciousness is exhibited under the impression that I'm a product of material nature. Shatma Buddhi Kuna Petri Dhatuke Swadi Kala Tradishu Bhuma Ijadi. We think the land that we are born in is worshipable. We think that our family members that we are surrounded by are permanently our own. And we think in terms of I and mine, all of these things, and we become attached. This verse of Bhagavatam describes that. We become attached to our body, our children, our home, our property, relatives, wealth, all these things. we see in this way in terms of eye and mind connecting it to this material body. So it's a very difficult thing to get out of that consciousness because guess what? We have a material body and we have a material mind and we have senses and there's sense objects all over the place. So it's a very, very powerful illusory energy. And this is all called false ego. That is the manifestation, ahankara. This is called false ego. One who is absorbed in the thought of bodily conceptions cannot understand his situation. So Srila Prabhupada in that verse I just quoted, he mentions that also. He's no better than a cow or an ass. So a cow or an ass will simply go to a holy place in a river and have a drink of the fresh water. They're not able to go beyond that. They cannot understand the actual situation that they're placed in inside a body which is destined to die. So a human being who does not inquire into the absolute truth, atato brahma jignasa, that is the human capacity, then he's described as saeva gokara, like a cow, go saeva gokara, or an ass. So that's the limiting factor of the body. We can ask a tiger to become a vegetarian. We can expect a dog to speak nicely. They're going to bark because of the bodily. The body dictates the actions. It limits the consciousness and it dictates to the jiva, this is the body you have, now act like this. The living entity thinks himself separate and he thinks himself able to do everything independently, but actually he's controlled. I was listening to that, I think, yesterday. Um, this tendency to want to be free and independent when actually our situation is we're controlled. We are able to be controlled directly by Krishna. Mahatmanas tu mam partha daivam pakritam ashrita. Bhagavad Gita explains that those persons take shelter of the internal, those great Mahatma. So that term is the Mahatma, or Atma is the soul, and Maha is great. So great soul has broad intelligence, broad developed understanding of what is the situation of this cosmic manifestation. And the Duratma is described as the cripple-minded person, or the person who's not developed the capacity to understand his situation. Uh, uh, one who is absorbed in the thoughts of bodily concepts cannot understand his situation. Says those who are too attached to sense enjoyment and material opulence and who are bewildered by such things. There has a certain amount of material opulence, there has a certain amount of sense gratification. But if one becomes bewildered and thinks that that's the goal of life, then he misses the actual position. I'm thinking of some other verse in that connection. There's so many verses point to this. So in that way, and when the Bhagavatam is explaining that, it says that when one thinks that the goal is sense gratification, nunam pramata kurate vikarma, he engages in all kinds of activities, sinful activities. He doesn't realize that they're sinful activities. In fact, he just engages like an animal unrestrictedly in different activities. He doesn't realize that because he's mad, he becomes mad due to that full absorption, thinking that sense gratification is the goal of life. He becomes mad after sense gratification, and thus he engages in all kinds of sinful activity. He doesn't realize that the body he has now has been awarded to him due to his past activities, and that by continuing to act in this way, he'll be awarded one material body after another through 400,000 species. So this is an amazing reality. And again, we have to ask ourselves, well, what is being presented as some other reality. Let's not embrace the spiritual reality. And again, we're left floundering in the material world with that there's nothing other than sense gratification, and when you die, you die. There's no God, there's no plan or reason for all of this, and that's what you've got. This is not very broad. This is the duratma. You're thinking like that, very limited. And we can, as I've mentioned many times before, this concept is being presented by Krishna and the acharyas, and as it unfolds, we can see it happening. Yeah, becomes Rajavija Rajaguyam Pavitram Idum Uttamam Pratyaksha Dharmyam Shusukam Kartam Avyayam. In Bhagavad Gita, I think it's the 9th chapter, maybe 2nd verse, Krishna says, this knowledge is the king of education. It's the most secret, Guyam, and it's the most secret of all secrets. And because it gives direct perception of the self by realization, it is a perfection of religion. It's everlasting and joyfully performed. We find is that if we on this path of devotional service, bhakti yoga, it becomes pratyaksha, it becomes directly experienced. We start to see, in fact, very quickly we see, if I act in the mode of ignorance, there's a certain result. If I act in the mode of passion, there's another result. Ignorance means always suffering. Passion means suffering after a sense of enjoyment. And the mode of goodness, if we function in the mode of goodness, they're blessed by knowledge and understanding of our position that can be understood in the mode of goodness. Then that this is there is a progression from wherever we are. We can see that there's a progression of purification, just like we said earlier. The materially contaminated jiva, what is he contaminated by? He's contaminated by this false ego, and then the 3 modes of material nature push him to act in the time element, and he becomes bound up in all of that. So one who's absorbed and thought of bodily conceptions. So that is the life, means to go beyond the bodily conceptions of life and to realize that I am not the gross body and senses, neither am I the mind and developed intellect, which is another level, a little higher, a bit higher, but I am actually an eternal spiritual entity. Na Jayate Mriyate Vakarachim. And Krishna says right at the beginning to Arjuna, never was there a time that I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future will any of us cease to be. We're unborn, eternal, ever existing, undying. We're not slain when the body is slain. So this is, wow, it's like downtown Auckland sometimes. In fact, it's busier. It should be quiet for a few seconds. So the main point is that we get direct perception, pratyaksha. We see the modes of nature. This is the time, 9 o'clock, so it's 9:30, 9:15. So the Rajagun comes. Sattvagun is early, and then we have Rajagun. So it begins. People get up and go about their activities in the world, and generally not ponder much more than that. Okay, so Bhagavad Gita was spoken to liberate one from the bodily conception of life. And Prabhupada was sometimes, people say, oh, Prabhupada always talked about you're not this body, you're not this body. But it just makes an absolute massive shift to our life when we get clarity around that point, and we can from there. Identity. I was talking to my good wife the other way, and she was quoting Urmila Mataji. She has a little acronym. I can't remember acronyms very well, but I can remember the first one is identity. So then I'm trying to, I can't remember. But anyway, identity is the first one. When we get the identity clear, that I am an eternal spiritual being, not this material body, then we can become we can shift our focus. We can focus differently, completely. So it makes a massive difference. Then we can become absorbed. Instead of absorbed in bodily activities, we can become engaged and absorbed in spiritual activities. And the material activities have to go on, they will go on, but that's not our absorption. Yeah, we have to do them diligently, but that's not our goal. Hmm? Our goal is something quite different. So it was the Bhagavad Gita one from the bodily conception of life, and Arjuna put himself in this position in order to receive the mission. One must be free from the bodily conception of life. That is the preliminary activity for the transcendentalist. And another thing that's I've mentioned many times, but it's worth mentioning here, and that is that it seems like it's a preliminary activity for the transcendentalist. Hey, I understood that, 5 years ago, or 10, or 20, or 30, or 50, or whatever number of years ago. I understood that, so I don't need to go to that. I already know that. Oh, yeah, you already know that. Okay, no. When you're training to be an Olympic athlete, for example, when you go to training each year, you might have a layoff time after the Olympics, peak perform back to the basics. We used to do it in the football training. You'd run up the terraces. So there was in the stadium. There's terraces, steps going all the way up, so as people can see. So there were two places. One would be to the Olympic Stadium, and we'd do the training up and down, pass until you were really, really exhausted. And the other one, after you wanted a break from that, we could go to the beach and you run on the soft sand through sand dunes and up and down and stuff like that. So you do the basic training. Although if you're, yeah, you may be a little, what would you say? You might want to keep fit, but still you require that. So this basic understanding is so fundamental to our development of Krishna consciousness. Another one that's very fundamental in Bhagavad Gita is Matra Sparshas Tukundaya, Sitoshna Sukha Dukkha, Agama Paino Nichastams Tatiksha Sastva Bharata. From the first day when we joined Krishna consciousness, the non-permanent appearance of happiness, distress, and their disappearance in due course are like the appearance and disappearance of the winter and reasons. They arrive from sense perception or Skyna Bharat, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. Oh, that's an old verse. I know that verse. But don't we find occasionally that we're caught by this? Oh, not happy. Okay, what's the big deal? Tatiksha, become tolerant. Don't expect it's always going to be happy. There's always going to be distress and happiness. Again, it opens up the whole science of life as a devotee. Um, we have to be introspective in our life and see if do I need to make some adjustments so that things will go on better. So that's natural. At the same time, we should not be pushed and pulled back and forward by the modes of nature and the appearance of happiness and distress due to our sense perception. Someone says, "Oh, Jai Shila's a real nice guy." Maybe I feel happy. Jai Shila's a shocking guy. I don't like him at all. You hear that, you feel unhappy. So it's natural, but we have to learn to tolerate. I'm sorry, I'm diverging slightly here, but I was with Madhu Mangala the other day. He came through to the farm here, and he had a book from one of Lord Chaitanya's, Prabhupada Saraswati, and there was some verses in there, and I was just quickly reading two or three, and I was, humbled totally when he was writing. He said that the person who criticizes me, he's my dearest friend. The person who speaks ill against me, I embrace him. But it was so real the way he was writing, and yeah, because he was seeing that all these things are meant for my purification. They're meant for me to come to this pure Krishna bhakti. Okay, so this has been spoken. Arjuna has put himself in that position to receive this information. and one has to come free from the bodily concept. That is the preliminary activity for the transcendentalist. One who wants to become free, who wants to become liberated, must first of all learn that he is not this material body. Mukti, or liberation, means freedom from material consciousness. In the Srimad Bhagavatam also, the definition of liberation is given. Muktir hit vanyata rupam swarupena vyavastitaha. Mukti means liberation from the contaminated consciousness of this material world and situation in pure consciousness. All the instructions of Bhagavad Gita are intended to awaken this pure consciousness, and therefore we find at the last stage of the Gita's instructions that Krishna is asking Arjuna whether he is now in purified consciousness. Purified consciousness means acting in accordance with the instructions of the Lord. I was asked the other day, what does surrender mean? So this is one of the items of surrendering. In fact, in a nutshell, it pretty much sums it up. We hear all over the place in all the Shastras that one has to surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So what does that entail? So here's a good definition. It means acting, or it says purified consciousness. So when we surrender to come to the point of purified consciousness. It means acting in accordance with the instructions of the Lord. Surrendering or giving up our identity. I say independent, I mean independent of our connection and relationship with the Supreme Lord. So it means to act in accordance with the instructions of the Lord. And Arjuna did that. He gave up his own independent idea, which was to give up the fighting in the Battle of Kurukshetra. He didn't like the possible outcomes, but then Krishna pointed out that you're thinking in a materialistic way. The wise persons should not lament for the living nor the dead. So to act in accordance with the instructions of the Lord, that is the whole key of Bhagavad Gita. This is the whole sum and substance of purified consciousness. Consciousness is already there because we are part and parcel of the Lord. But for us, there is the affinity of being affected by the inferior modes. But the Lord, being the Supreme, is never affected. That is the difference between the Supreme Lord and the small individual souls. Nityo Nichanam Chetanas Chetananam Eko Bahunam Vidadhati Kaman. The Shastra explains that there are many eternals and there's one supreme eternal. There are many cognizant personalities and there's one supreme cognizant being. We are cognizant of our own body, and Krishna is cognizant or fully aware of all living entities. It's a massive difference. It's not like massive, it's colossally, massively, etc. It is absolutely, again, inconceivable. Our potency is very, very small. It's practically inconceivably small. Anu, you're very small, and Vibhum, Krishna is described. He's very great, so great that our brain cannot stretch to the transcendental autocrat who's ever inviting us to associate with him in an eternal serving mood, quoting Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. The transcendental autocrat, that is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this is the fundamental, and it is the ongoing requisite for the devotee to not identify with the body and not to identify with the mind. Arjuna said, it's very difficult to control the mind, my lord. I think that it's as difficult as controlling the wind. I don't think it's possible. And the Lord agrees. He says, Asamsayam Mahabaho Manu Dunigram. He said, it is undoubtedly mighty armed Arjuna. So he's addressing Arjuna in that way. Oh, mighty armed Arjuna, it is undoubtedly very difficult to control the wind. But it is possible by constant practice and by detachment. So this is two of the, again, requirements for devotional life. We have to become detached from from activities that will take us into. I'm going to put the window down again. It's actually warming up. Sure it is where you are too. Turn that off. Turn this off. Okay. Where was I? Where was I? I was thinking that we have to become detached and we have to practice. So that is the way. Uh, and so, what to speak of the body? The senses are grouped around the mind. So the mind is described as the sixth sense. There's the five knowledge acquiring senses and five active working senses and the mind. So we are neither the physical body, neither are we the mind. And so we have to practice, and we have to practice what? Detachment and attachment. It's not just the negation, but it is the gradually developing. Srila Prabhupada explained, like just like the scales, you see the scales of justice. I think America they have that as a sign. So two pans on one side, on the other side. So as we place spiritual activities on one side of a scale, naturally the other side reduces. And the more spiritual activities we engage in, Krishna throughout Bhagavad Gita encourages that. He says you should always think, you're going to think of something, think of me. You're going to eat something, then eat Krishna Prasadam. You're going to do something, do it for me. So he's saying, make everything spiritualized. And what will happen is that one's material, the weight of material energy will reduce proportionately. So, I'm not going to speak too long this morning. I wish we were interacting a little bit because that is always good. I've got a new screen in front of me. There seems to be, I don't know if it'll work, but there's one little thing in the chat box. I don't know if my phone, it's up for debate. Maybe I need a new phone. It's possible. I'm pressing this button, but nothing seems to happen. The first time, that little red, can't read it, but there's a button there, and it's supposed to allow me to see. But anyway, it's all good. So what I'm thinking to do is I could make up one of my own questions. That would be pretty interesting. Gosh, what would be a question? What would be a question? One question that just came just as I said that was, why does Krishna make it so difficult? Control the mind, it's so inextricable to extricate oneself out of this illusory. It's a reasonable question. And it's a perennial question that keeps coming up. Again, part of the basics, part of the basic training. That question will come up, and we begin to we blame Krishna. Really, that's what's going on. Why does he make it so difficult? Why isn't he intelligent like me and make it a bit easier? Um, but that great difficult ocean for those who take shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord, that ocean of material world is the amount of water in the hoofprint of a calf, Bhagavatam says. Sorry, my mind's gone again. Somebody's doing weed eating. I don't know if you can hear it, but it's like having a massive, whatever it's called, going on. Yes, so why does it make it difficult? It's not actually that whole powerful energy which is insurmountable. Daivahi shagunamai mama maya duratyaya. Krishna says, my material energy is very difficult to overcome. But those who surrender unto me, those who take shelter of my lotus feet can easily cross over, because that huge ocean is reduced down to the amount of water in the hoofprint of a calf. So that's the way of Krishna's energies. They perform different activity, and they are influenced by internal and external potency of the Lord. So when the Lord sees that the devotee is endeavoring with great determination and enthusiasm, trying to become detached by and practicing that, practicing detachment, coming back to center. I think we discussed that the other day too. When you're flying an airplane, it's pointed out that the airplane is 90, maybe 99% of the time off course, but it basically has to keep making small adjustments to stay on course. And by making those small adjustments, it goes and gradually reaches its destination. Same when you're driving a car, even. You move that way, this way, that way, that way. You gradually keeping on course, but actually check out you're off course a lot of the time. You got to keep making adjustments. So that is spiritual life too. We have to constantly be vigilant and practice this process at every time, in every circumstance, at every stage of our lives. And so that, Prabhupada points out, um, I'm sure it's here in the introduction as well, he said the time of death, it's all a preparation for the time of death. So that at that time there'll be a great distraction. The great distraction will be there's no more parties, there's no more pizza, there's no more this, there's no more that. And guess what? This is it. it's it's the last stand, because it's time to leave. And that is a pretty tough disturbance. So there's a lot of practice has to go in, so that we can practice how to take shelter of Krishna in all circumstances, in every way. So great devotees, they pray, let this come now, just like Maharaj Pariksit accepted that he would be bitten by the snake bird of Shringi, the son of the Brahmana. The Brahmanas were so powerful that even a young boy, 11, 12 years old, was able to curse the king. The king, being the great devotee that he was, could have counteracted that curse, but he accepted it. And then Shukadev Goswami is explaining that he says, you're very fortunate. He was trying to encourage, he had been asked by Pariksit Maharaj, what should I do? What should I hear? What activity should I take up at this very critical stage, the last days of my life? And so he begins to instruct him and says that you're very fortunate, because uh, you have 7 days. Katvanga Maharaj, for example, he quotes what is it? That's 2, 1, 13 or 14. He says, Kadvanga Namaraj Rishir Gatre Yatam Ihayusa Muhurtat Sarvam Utsrija Gatavam Abayam Harim. That that Kadvanga Maharaj, as soon as he heard that the duration of his life was only a moment longer, immediately left aside everything and took full shelter of the supreme shelter, the supreme personality of Godhead. So he only had a moment. Uh, uh, so he pointed that out. My dear Pariksit Maharaj, you are very blessed, because you have clearly 7 days. So what we should do is sit and hear. Tat Srinu, hear from me. That Krishna says, hear from him in Bhagavad Gita, and Sukadev says, just let us hear. So through the process of hearing, Pariksit Maharaj became perfected. Pardon me. So we don't know that time of death. Prabhupada points that out. We don't know. We think, oh, yeah, it's okay for Jai Sila to speak. He's getting old. He's talking about that. I'm only 25 or 35 or whatever age you may be. But death is there. It's just we don't see it. The jaws of death are rather large, and we don't see that that's actually where we're situated. And any time those jaws close, and when they close, it's shut, done. So we do not know when um, our last breath will be. So this practice then should be there, so that we can be able to go beyond the demands of the physical body, the demands and pushings of the senses and the mind's focus on so many things of this world. Okay, so I'm going to finish there. Um, I hope this came through okay. Um, show me things that didn't work for, but it seems to have worked, and that's pretty good. The only the chat box I can't open, but I'll maybe talk to Arjuna about that and see if I can do that. So we'll finish there. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavad Gita. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna.